Riddler Mindbender is the classic Schwarzkopf coaster at Six Flags Over Georgia. This ride was beloved by coaster enthusiasts and locals, but after the 2019 season, this ride received a major refurbishment. While this did preserve the attraction for many years to come, it came at a cost. The Mindbender I knew has been ruined. It's not bad at this point. In fact, it's still an enjoyable ride. It is just not what it used to be. I'll explain why in this review. Schwarzkopf made waves in the amusement industry in the mid-1970s for reintroducing the vertical loop. They put this element on custom looping coasters like Super Duper Looper at Hershey Park, as well as shuttle loops like Montezuma's Revenge at Knott's Berry Farm. In 1978, Six Flags opened two Schwarzkopf custom loopers. One would be Shockwave at Six Flags Over Texas. The other would be Mindbender at Six Flags Over Georgia. One of the best aspects about this coaster has always been its location. It is very much a terrain coaster, as it's located on a ravine. While some elements run along trees, others are highly visible from the parking lot, so it's a big part of the entry experience. This ride was originally part of the USA section of the park, and it had a silver paint scheme at that time. Just 1 year after it opened, the ride's area was transformed into Jolly Roger's Island, and the coaster was subsequently repainted brown throughout the 1980s. In 1997, Mindbender's section was transformed into Gotham City. The coaster was painted green to tie in with a famous Batman villain, the Riddler. This character had been recently featured in the Batman Forever film, and the ride's pre-existing name lent itself well to that character. We have seen a lot of Schwarzkopfs get overhauled to continue operating. This specifically has happened to two of their oldest custom loopers. For the 2012 season, Hershey Park's Super Duper Looper received new trains from Gerstlauer. For the 2016 season and Revolution's 40th anniversary, Six Flags Magic Mountain gave the coaster new trains. So it's not too surprising Mindbender was updated as well after the 2019 season. The ride reopened late in 2021 with 5 key changes. First, the coaster was repainted the same shade of green. This change was positively received. It made the colors more vibrant, which was really nice since it's one of the most visible coasters in the parking lot. Second, the coaster is renamed Riddler Mindbender. While I don't mind the addition of the villain to the ride's name, I much preferred the old sign. You had an archway topped with a box device from the Batman Forever film. Then you had a large, neon-lit green question mark and funky text bearing the ride's name. It was iconic. The new one has a more subtle archway, and even worse, the sign was shrunk and made cartoony. The name is much less prominent, instead placing the emphasis on the character. As before, there's no theming during the attraction. The theme doesn't go beyond the name. Third, sections of track were replaced. Mindbender was always a very smooth ride, and much of the coaster remains that way. However, there is now an awful pothole at the bottom of the helix. It's a very jarring moment. Fourth, the coaster received new trains. These were designed by Balger and Mabillard. While they feature similar restraints to the old trains, and I'd even argue they could be even more comfortable, they were shortened. Mindbender's old trains were comprised of 7 cars, and each car had 2 rows of 2, so each train could hold a max of 28 riders. Now the trains are comprised of just 5 cars, so the trains now hold just 20 riders. This not only hurt the throughput, but it also impacted the ride dynamics. Also impacting the ride dynamics is the 5th change, trim brakes. These were always there. The first one before the helix rides similarly as before, only slowing the train a tiny bit. But the second one was much harsher than before. At least when I visited the park in May of 2023, the trim before the drop into the second loop was bringing the train to a near total stop. Before the refurb, you pretty much rolled right through these brakes. Now let's look at the positives with the renovation. The most notable impact is that this will allow Riddler Mindbender to continue operating for many years to come between the updated hardware and modifications. I think it's also important the ride retain the super low 42-inch height requirement. Most looping coasters have 48 to 54-inch height requirements. This means Mindbender is often the first looping coaster for kids in the area, and I would argue the modifications have made the coaster a bit more digestible for younger riders by lessening the forces. As a coaster enthusiast, I wish the coaster still ran like it once did, but this coaster is clearly just as popular as ever with park guests. This ride gets one of the longer lines in the park. While the coaster now has 3 trains, I have only seen 2 in use at once. If the park is busy, do not be surprised if the line is at least 30 to 45 minutes midday. The queue line is shaded at least, as it's underneath a tree canopy. To beat the crowds, you can either head there early or late in the day. Alternatively, you can use the paid Flash Pass skip the line system. I did notice a single rider line by the main entrance, but these were chained off for multiple rides during my visits to Six Flags Over Georgia recently, so I'm not sure if the park has stopped using these altogether. Maybe a local could chime in how frequently they're used nowadays. Hitting this coaster when it's a near total walk-on has a key advantage. You can select your seat. When the line gets backed up, at least during my recent visits, employees were assigning rows, and they weren't always taking seating requests. As for which row you want, the front or back car will provide the best ride. If you sit in one of the middle rows, you won't get the airtime you get on the ends of the train. Once seated, you have a seatbelt and U-shaped lap bar. Guests can fasten their own seatbelts, but the employees will manually lower the lap bars themselves, presumably so they can easily verify the seatbelts before the restraints block them. Employees didn't seem to be stapling, but the lap bars were resting against the thighs of riders. Once dispatched, you have this weird straightaway. Then you head up the 80-foot or 24-meter tall lift hill. It's not too fast, nor do you have too much of a view due to the trees. At the top, you have a slow 180-degree turn. It subtly drops down and up on the way though. Then you reach the first drop. With the old trains, those in back used to get a good burst of airtime. With 2 less cars, the current back row only gets an okay pop of airtime in this drop. And unfortunately, this isn't the only element that has its airtime nerfed. You then careen through the first of 2 vertical loops. This is every bit as good as it used to be. The circular inversion leads to strong and sustained positive Gs. It is exactly what you'd expect from a Schwarzkopf loop. You then jump into a big turnaround. With the old trains, those up front got a robust burst of airtime. Now they just get a weak pop. You then slow down a smidge from a trim brake and turn 180 degrees. Next comes what the park calls an inclined loop. For years, the park actually advertised this element as an inversion. It is not an inversion. It is just a large banked helix. You have a swooping drop down to the bottom of the ravine. I'm pretty sure this may be the largest plunge on the ride since the ravine is set 4 stories below the station. While the drop never had any airtime, it gets exciting at the bottom. There's a wicked head chopper with a support, then everyone gets pummeled by intense positive Gs, the strongest on the ride. Now unfortunately, the low point now is plagued by a bad pothole. You will get an uncomfortable lateral slam up front, and get jarred awfully further back in the train. It sort of spoils what should have been a highlight of the ride. You then rise upwards to complete the helix. Then you have a straight and sizable drop. Today, it gives weak floater airtime towards the back. Previously, it had much sharper and stronger negative Gs in the back. The train then rises into another turnaround. Those up front get some weak floater airtime, but you have less momentum than before, so it's a stark contrast to the ejector pop you used to get. You then round a high turn and some trees. You then hit the nasty trim brake I mentioned earlier. I visited the park on 2 different weekends back in May, and each time, this brought the train to a near full stop. This neutered the second half. The final drop, which used to offer nice ejector airtime, now offers just a small pop of airtime. It is still cool how this drop goes down the ravine at least. You then have the second vertical loop. Before the refurb, this loop was about as forceful as the first, offering plenty of positive Gs. Now the train takes it at a much slower clip. You still get solid positives in the valleys before and after the loop, but you slow down atop the inversion, which causes you to start leaning forwards. It's a weird sensation on a Schwarzkopf. You then climb out of the ravine. You shoot through a tunnel and find yourself back in Gotham City. It's a fun change of scenery. Then you round one last turn, which is rather slow and forgettable, and then you hit the final brakes. You then return to the station, ending the 3,253-foot or 992-meter-long coaster. I already touched on the smoothness, which in short is excellent minus the bottom of the helix, but what about the pacing? it's a mixed bag. While the drops and inversions are fun, the ride does let its foot off the gas in the high turns. These don't do much other than offer you a chance to catch your breath. So what would I rate Riddler Mindbender? I would give this coaster a 6 out of 10. This is still a decent ride. I absolutely love the ride's location. The terrain allows this coaster to pack in a series of sizable drops, and the two loops, particularly the first one, are still satisfying, but the experience is not quite as thrilling as it used to be. The biggest change is the diminished airtime. The negative G's made this coaster unique compared to other loopers, which mostly focus just on the inversions. Now you just get small bits of airtime. Before, you used to get some good ejector pops on any drop or ascent. The toned down ride experience caused the rating to drop by 2 to 2.5 points for me. This was once a well above average Schwarzkopf for me. Now it's towards the middle of the pack. If you saw my top 10 Schwarzkopf coasters ranking video, you'll know I had the old version of Mindbender at number 4. The version I just experienced probably drops down to the 10 spot, if it even makes the list. That being said, the changes will allow this coaster to continue to operate for decades, and you can make a strong argument the coaster is now a better introductory looping coaster for younger guests, while still having enough to make it a fun coaster for older riders. Just don't expect the intensity you could have experienced in the ride's first 40 years. This update does make me concerned about the future of Over Texas's Shockwave. It is now the oldest Schwarzkopf custom looper not to be updated. I would definitely try to ride that coaster soon just in case a similar change happens to that one. The airtime in the middle drops of that ride currently is legendary. So those are my thoughts on the Riddler Mindbender at Six Flags Over Georgia. What are your thoughts on the Schwarzkopf looper? Do you agree the changes hurt the overall ride experience? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this review, I would appreciate it if you gave this video a like, and you considered subscribing, because there'll be a lot more roller coaster and amusement park videos here at Canopy Coaster. Thanks for watching.